Imagine unlocking the secrets of how your lifestyle choices could literally change your genetic makeup and help you age slower and live longer. That's exactly what we'll be talking about with our guest today, so stick around.
Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Men Talking Mindfulness. Today we've got Dr. Tshaka Cunningham as our guest, the Chief Scientific Officer at Polaris Genomics. Genomics. Okay, all right. And he also heads up the Faith-Based Genetics Research Institute. Tshaka's got an amazing background in molecular biology and genetics, having studied at Princeton and the Rockefeller University. He works a lot in epigenetics and the longevity space, two areas that really help us understand how we age and how our environment influences our genes. So stick around because you're about to learn how simple changes in our lifestyle to include mindfulness could potentially alter your genetic destiny. Welcome, Dr. Cunningham. Good to see you.
Great to be here, guys.
And Will, good to see you, my friend, as well.
Welcome. I'm definitely sticking around for this episode, John. With that intro, it's like, I want to know, right, about longevity and epigenetics and stuff like that. But hey, everyone that's listening, do you need a microdose? We're offering them for free. And, these aren't the microdoses that you might be thinking about. John and I have ripped some of our most helpful and powerful content into 3 to 10 minute clips that you can enjoy. Our microdose series, we're going to launch on November 1st. So feel free to indulge in as many microdoses as you like and share these microdoses with your loved ones, because I'm sure they'd like to get a little high on some wisdom and inspiration, right? I'm trying here, John.
There you go. I love it.
Commercials, like what the hell? And hey, another thing that we're going to be launching in 2025 is we're going to have our social fitness club. So let's connect. It's going to be men's only. And to learn more about that, head to mentalkingmindfulness.com, or you can simply text MTM to 33777. And let's just do our one breath grounding practice, just to kind of bring us a little more into the here and now. So we can open up our ears, open up our mind, and receive some of this wonderful wisdom by Dr. Cunningham today. So let's just start. Exhale the breath out. Close the eyes if you like. Get in touch with that exhale. And let's take a big, giant inhale, filling into your belly if you can. And it slowly works its way up to the chest. Let's hold that breath for 3, 2, 1, and exhale, nice and easy through the mouth. Fantastic. And hey, thank you all for being here, for tuning in, for sharing our podcast, for helping us grow, and for becoming more mindful. All right, let's jump in. Tshaka, hey, thank you so much for joining us. First up, what fascinates you about epigenetics that has made you kind of dedicate your life to it?
Well, I'm, a genetics nerd, right? And I've kind of got a weird background in that sense, in that I've been actually doing science since I was a kid. My grandmother was a cancer researcher at the National Cancer Research. So I've been doing lab-related molecular genetics type of stuff since I was 7.
Wow.
Right? So
you are a nerd. Total nerd.
In a good way.
Total nerd.
Yeah, I know.
I played sports as well. I played football in high school and then also in college. So
wow,
kind of doc nerd thing going on. But
yeah,
proudly own that title of genetics nerd, because now we're getting into like a really cool kind of era of our ability to understand genetics at scale. We're in what we call now the genomics era. So I'll just give some basic background. I know not everybody out here has a PhD in molecular biology like I did, but
not everyone,
and really just deals with it. But we've all heard of what DNA is, right? Like we all kind of have an idea of what it is. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and really what it is it's the substance of like our existence. It's what makes us us. So we all have like the letters of DNA, A, T, C, and G. Again, all species kind of look at the same letters, A, T, C, and G, but we have a unique pattern of that sequence. A, T, C, and G, each one of us that makes us unique. Okay. And we get it from our ancestors, and who got it from their ancestors all the way back to the first humans. Right. And so when we look at all of this stuff now, we're able to study changes in that DNA over time in ways that we never could before because of technological advances that have really happened in the last 25 years. And to me, that's super fascinating because it's been like a convergence of multiple technologies, not just the understanding biology and different sort of pathways in biology better, but also like Silicon Valley type computational stuff, right? So we do a lot of computational work with this kind of research that we do. And it's led to this kind of nexus point where we're in now, where we can sequence an individual human genome in less than 24 hours. And just to give you some perspective, when I was in grad school many years ago, 25 years ago, that process took decades. Okay.
What?
Yes,
it took like over a decade to get the first draft of the human genome.
Okay? Yeah, the Human Genome Project, right? That was like, exactly, right. Huge.
Yeah, just get like 5, right? From 5 individuals, and it costs like $1 billion or something like that. Now I can do it in my lab. I have a lab, I have a genetics lab. I can do a whole genome sequence, my own, yours, anybody's, for less than $1,000 and in less than 24 hours.
That's incredible.
That's it. This concept, just to give you some more perspective on it, so there's this thing called Moore's Law that they look at in the Silicon Valley, microchip industry. Yeah. It's the amount of data you can fit on a microchip, and it keeps getting, more and more. The capability to sequence, per unit time has outstripped Moore's Law. So in a tech sector, we're killing it. What excites me about it, you asked that question, and I'll give you a bit of a long-winded answer, but I just want you to sense that we are at the precipice of understanding human genetics in ways that we never could before. And that's going to help us do several things. One, it's going to help us predict disease better than we ever could before. Excellent. It's going to help us find new targets for the drug companies to work at to treat the diseases. Okay. And it's going to help us be able to alter our environment and things to better suit us in ways that we never have been able to do before. So think like long range space travel, all of this stuff. How can we protect ourselves against the rigors of radiation and all of these things? And advance, if we're going to Mars, genetics and our understanding of human genetics will allow us to do that. And so I'm very excited to be doing what I'm doing at this time. And even for the remainder of my career, which would probably be another 20, 30 years if I'm lucky, right? So,
if the genetics keep up, you might be doing it for 100 years, right?
Well, that will be really interesting because I have such an interest in longevity, in the longevity space. Because again, I look at our bodies as this tremendous and amazing reaction. It's a set of chemical reactions that's happening constantly. Right. It's like somewhat controlled chaos, if you think about it in that way, right? Wow. And our ability to understand the genetics of that and how genetics impact that chaos is going to be really cool. So you think about people that live to be 100, their genetics versus people who die young, their genetics. Right. So understanding in greater detail the genetics of advanced aged individuals will maybe one day help us all live to a longer lifespan.
Right. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have my faith and I believe in what is going to happen after this, but that doesn't mean I'm in any rush to get there. Right.
Yeah, true.
I've got 3 young kids. I've got a beautiful bride. I want to be around for as long as I can for them. And so longevity has become something that I'm becoming more and more interested in. And Dr. Teresa Larson, who you know, and Will and I work with, we have started getting more and more into that. I actually recently downloaded an app on my phone, and it certainly is not, I'm sure, to the level of accuracy that you can predict with what the work that you do. But it's called Humanity, and it shows my biological age versus my chronological age. And right now it's showing that I am 47 years old chronologically, but it's showing that I'm 46.8 Now it just actually literally just changed as I opened up the app to 46.7 and it says, congratulations, you're getting younger. So I don't know.
That's dropped in a few weeks, John. I think like a month ago you were 51 or something.
I was 50.
I remember that. Okay.
Now, obviously it's an app, and I think more than anything, I use it for behavior change. I'm trying to get out and walk more. I'm trying to get out into the sun. I'm trying to meditate more. I mean, I'm a big meditator anyway, but I try to meditate because all this goes into the calculations. Yeah. That's all to say. Go for it.
Interesting science.
It really is.
It's still emerging. But what those kind of apps and things are getting at is when they talk about your biological age, it's really a kind of a measurement of the density. You mentioned epigenetics. What is epigenetics?
Yes. That was the next question.
Is, right?
Yes, let's get in there.
Genetics, which is kind of your baseline, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then epigenetics is like how the environment impacts your genetics. That's the way I like to think of it. It's like external too, right? And so how do these external factors impact literally your DNA? So there's a process that can happen that happens throughout your lifetime called DNA damage. So your DNA gets damaged repeatedly just by living, by average everyday living, UV light, toxins in our environment. So like sunlight, toxins, all this stuff, they damage
consumption of food. I'd imagine,
different foods, that preservatives, right? Yeah. Stress, that's the big damager of DNA. So you talk about mindfulness, cortisol levels being too high and inducing stress really is like taking the Russian roulette shots at your DNA. That's what I like to call it.
That's just pretty morbid.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's kind of like smoking. Things like smoking and things that are so like bad for you. They cause stress. They cause DNA damage. Okay, and DNA damage is generally bad because what happens, you get a code that is yours. And based on that code, you have some traits that you got from your parents, like your predisposition for cancer and your tendency to live longer, your natural longevity, all of that. Okay. But when you start doing these things and other sort of unhealthy practices, they can damage your DNA. And that will create issues where if you damage the wrong piece of DNA, you could damage a piece of DNA that is part of a gene, right? That encodes a protein that tells your cells not to grow. Okay, it's called a tumor suppressor. So if you get a mutation in like a tumor suppressor gene, what's going to happen? You can't suppress the tumor, so you're going to get cancer. Okay, so there's this linkage between all of these kind of behaviors in DNA. But epigenetics, one of the most common epigenetic changes we see is called methylation. Okay, it's actually an addition of a methyl group to a cytosine in your DNA. That's that's the C in your DNA. So it tends to increase or enhance as you age. So that's why they say biologically, if you have like hypermethylated DNA, you seem older because you've done a lot of damage or you've kind of accumulated these methylation events that make your DNA sort of, not as pretty and pristine as it was when you were younger.
Is there a way to not only prevent that damage, but can you reverse it?
There's interesting science on that because I think the jury's still out on that a bit. There may be some things that you can reverse, but there may be others that you can't. And we don't understand enough about it yet, to be frank, that we need to do a lot more research in that regard. But the general consensus is that if you can just do certain specific things that just engender a healthier lifestyle, you can prevent DNA damage. And that is something that is known. Like you can do things that will sort of reduce your stress. You can not smoke. You can exercise, which tends to help with these things. And then you can create a general anti-inflammatory environment in your body because inflammation is the other major culprit for DNA damage. That will kind of protect your DNA more because you only get one set of DNA, one sequence.
Right.
And when you start, like I say, playing Russian roulette with it, doing all these other things, and these unhealthy behaviors, you're really setting yourself up for a bad outcome.
Well, I think one thing that would be important, you said inflammation, and epigenetics, what are some of the inflammation agents that really, or things that cause inflammation so we can stay away from, so we can protect our DNA and take the gun out of our hand, if you will. Yeah. Sorry. Right.
And it's a cumulative effect. A lot of things can cause an inflammatory situation in your body. And, stress is the biggest one. I think
Right.
there's long-standing links between stress and higher inflammation.
I
Diet.
hear more and more. Diet like seed oils. I keep hearing
diet,
more and more. Yep. Okay.
Eating foods that are sort of like create a less sort of oxidative reaction in your body. So antioxidants are good, right? Like these kinds of things that's why you hear these things that are good for you, like antioxidants and other things. They're just trying to lower your overall sort of status of inflammation in your body. So things, I think, again, stress is a leading cause of it, diet, lack of exercise, and then other things like smoking. Smoking is like, when I look at what smoking does from an inflammatory perspective, I'm like, why do people even do this? Because it's just like, it's like setting off a bomb in your immune system. Okay.
Right.
And that's what inflammation is. It's really like your immune system kind of going haywire. It's trying to fix stuff. Your immune system is what you have that helps protect you against the environment, infections and everything. And when you have all these toxins and other things like arsenic and the tar and all that stuff that comes in, let's say with cigarette smoke in your lungs, then you're setting off a bomb, inflammatory, and it goes throughout your body. That's why smoking is such a big risking indicator for a lot of other conditions like heart disease and other things that thrive on inflammation. So if I would say anything, one of the major keys to living a healthier, longer life would be to try to do things that can overall lower your natural set of inflammation where you are. Like your set point. Now it's a little difficult because everybody has a different set point.
Okay.
But just think about like if your set point is in the middle, okay, you don't want to push it to higher, right? And so like do some of these things like meditation, stress release, and then diet and exercise. These are just normal things that will help you preserve your DNA longer and be less likely to have some of these bad health outcomes.
So
and it doesn't have to be like, sorry, John, it doesn't have to be like a long amount of time. I mean, like you can really, I mean, I know you're not like, physical therapist kind of thing, or, you're a genetic doctor or like doctor of genetics and understand, that realm. But do you know of like the relation, like how much, time and energy and effort should we put into pursuing, good nutrition, good overall physical health, good mental health, like meditation? Like, what does that look like on a daily basis or a week, if you will?
To me, my answer to that, this is my own personal opinion, as much as you can, right? Like, it's like to me, fair. It's just like good stuff. And if your goal is to live longer, you got to think about, we're all on from the moment we're born to the moment we die, we're all on like a clock, right? You talked about the clock. And so this is one of the things I really want to study later in my career, which is really how our DNA ages and why. Because I often wonder that, like, why do we age? And if you ask that question, we're kind of like a battery. That idea of a battery that just slowly loses power. Yeah. That's kind of like we are. So think about it. You're just all of these reactions going on constantly over 80 to 100 year period. And then once you hit about 50, 60, things just start breaking down.
Will, you're there. You're 50. Will.
Thanks, John.
But the speed with which that happens is something that we can maybe impact. We can impact by having a healthier lifestyle versus an unhealthy. So think about if I'm in the middle, right? And I'm kind of here and this is my normal kind of slowing down. Do I slow down rapidly, like fall off the cliff, or do I delay that slowing down by some healthier practices? These are choices that we as individuals make. Yeah. And I just encourage, I'm trying to, in my own life, just to make healthy choices. I mean, in this country, a lot of us are type A. We go hard and we don't vacation enough. I mean, I've lived in Europe before, they take the whole month of August off in France, right? And I kind of get that. Because there's a need for rest and relaxation and sort of recharging, they call it, that really will help your long-term health. And I'm hoping that our country gets back to that. So to just short answer to your question was as much as you can.
Tshaka's actually, Tshaka, what are you, 95 years old, right? He's been practicing for a while.
So I'm the same age as you guys. Yeah.
So, and Will is 51, but he looks like he's 35 because he's been practicing epigenetics for a while without even knowing it. You mentioned France there, which made me think about, these quote unquote blue zones. And, do you know anything about the blue zones and what people are doing in these zones? I guess it has a lot to do with what you've already talked about, their diet, they're taking time off, they're reducing cortisol, they're protecting their DNA. Do you know anything else that they're doing? I mean, is there something in the water there?
Well, there may be some genetics at play. Okay, so you guys, I'm going to throw out some terms that maybe some folks have heard.
Yeah.
Mitochondria.
Yeah.
Boom.
Anybody know what mitochondria is?
Back in the day,
The powerhouse of the cell.
So what does that mean? What is this? Like kind of like the battery of the cell.
battery.
It's the battery, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So not everybody has the same mitochondria. Right. So you get it from your maternal ancestors. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so that mitochondria, that engine, mitochondria actually has its own DNA. Did you guys know that?
I didn't.
Yeah, I've heard that actually. I mean, I studied biology, so I mean, I know a little bit about genetics. I started doing my master's actually in molecular genetics like years ago. And one of the theories is, and tell me if I'm wrong, is mitochondria, they believe, used to be its own cell and then was incorporated into the eukaryotic cells that we have.
Whoa, you guys are, I need to step out of this conversation. I'm getting left behind.
Well, I'm very impressed with you, Will, because you just described what we call in biology the endosymbiont theory, right?
Woohoo, yeah.
Boom, right? Got the mic. Make your mom proud all those years of education,
I know,
right? But no, that's exactly right. So billions of years ago when we were emerging as organisms, out of the goop, you had these smaller organisms that were almost like bacteria that got absorbed into what is now us, and they became organelles in the cells. So that's what you call the mitochondria, it's an organelle. And its primary purpose is to produce ATP, right? Which is the powerhouse engine. It's like the fuel of our cells, the energy.
Mhm.
That's why we got to eat to kind of do the whole electron transport chain and make ATP, right? So
adenosine triphosphate, right?
Exactly. It's
all right.
It's,
there. Now
John,
I just had to say that just so I could catch up with you guys.
John's flexing his big brain right now.
We're fucking nerd posturing right now. I love it. I love it.
right nerd in there. But anyway, the point being is not everybody's mitochondria is the same, right? So there may be some advantage. Like if you're in Japan and you're part of a long-lived lineage of Japanese families that have like a specific sequence of mitochondria, then you guys kind of have an advantage. Now, you can still do things to counteract that advantage. Like you smoke, you drink, you do all these things to create inflammation and you die younger. But at the baseline, your baseline for longevity was higher because you just inherited, you kind of won the genetic lottery. You inherited some great mitochondria. And I think that's an emerging area of research, these sort of differential mitochondrial sequences that I think is going to be really interesting to track and follow. Because what if the day comes where you can give one long-lived person's type of mitochondria to a shorter-lived person? Will that help them live longer?
Well,
we don't really know how to do it yet, but 25 years ago, we couldn't sequence a human genome either. So I could see something like that happening in the future.
Would epigenetics influence the DNA in the mitochondria? You know what I mean? So you don't win the mitochondrial lottery, right? And you have like a bunch of maternal mitochondrial DNA that is not, high functioning. So say it's instead of it being a 10, the best, it's only like a 5, right? So can we do something in our lifetime? And maybe it's not completely possible to re-engineer all of our mitochondria, but can we do something in our lifetime, pursuing more healthy lifestyle choices, doing things like we've kind of talked about earlier that can influence the mitochondrial DNA that eventually may pass more healthier or more, genetically, like a way that we can bring more of the genetically optimized mitochondrial DNA to, our offspring?
That's a great question, man. I mean, look, you stumped Dr. Cunningham on that one. I think that's a future thing because
awesome.
The technology right now doesn't exist to do that, but I'm imagining in the future, 30, 50 years in the future, we'll find ways to sort of navigate that. But we're still at the early days of understanding how the two do impact each other. So mitochondrial sequence versus the germline genetic sequence of the individual, right? So we don't, I mean, these things are starting to be appreciated just now in the last few years, even in the midst of, while we have these amazing technological advances, and I don't know how much your listeners know about this, but this is something I've been tracking as well. We can now edit the genome.
Yeah.
So have you ever heard of this thing called CRISPR?
Yeah, CRISPR is a motherfucker. Yeah,
what is it?
Amazing. Yeah, please. Yeah.
So I teach my kids about this, and I teach a group of young men here, K through 12, sixth graders, on how to do molecular biology. So they're learning how to do CRISPR gene editing. And so it's pretty cool. It stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. But for all of you guys out there, all that really means is that we can now go into the human genome with not that great precision, but, you know, somewhat, and actually fix something, change it. That's scary. That scary as hell to me. But the technology has existed since 2012 to do that. And now they've cured at least one disease with that, sickle cell disorder, which is a single genetic trait. They've actually fixed the sickle cell mutation in people and cured their sickle cell disease.
Wow.
Okay. So I imagine that kind of technology is going to just increase. And we're going to get better and better at it till we can actually pinpoint things. But this brings up a whole nother set of ethical concerns.
That was where I was going.
You don't ever want to do that on like a embryo or a baby. And there was a famous case in the last few years of a rogue Chinese scientist that kind of did that and gene edited a baby. So that's tantamount to human cloning, and that should never be tolerated. Like, to me, when you're messing with that, like, you never know what could happen, because you may have changed one thing here, but you don't know the other 100 or 1,000 things you're changing that could now screw up the whole human genome.
Right.
Did that embryo survive? Like, is that like a 6-year-old? So how old is that child now?
Probably a few years old, maybe 3 or 4. And the guy was trying to engineer the baby. So the parents, or one of the parents, had HIV. So he was trying to genetically engineer the baby to be resistant to HIV. But he made sort of a sloppy edit to it. So I don't know that even happened. But yeah, the baby was born. So they're out there somewhere in China, as what I've heard is that there is a gene edited person running around. And I just think there's a lot of danger to that. Like that when I heard that story, it made my heart sink as someone who kind of understands the science, because, you know, from an ethical perspective, there's certain things that just need to be sacred, like the human genome. Like, don't change it for everybody. I think if you want to change your own personal genome, more power to you, bro. Like, go do it. If you've got this disease or you're trying to fix something and you make that decision, that's your health decision. But when you're like changing it writ large and just kind of unleashing it on the world, I think that's too dangerous.
Okay. So basically doing it for an embryo, and then basically, like you said, human cloning at that point, that's the line that's crossed. Is that it?
Exactly right. Okay. When you start doing that on embryos and introducing it into our germline DNA, right? That's not, you know, specific to that individual. I can go out and be transmitted to anybody else. Okay. That's a problem. Versus if I wanted to take, let's say, my stem cells out of my bone marrow, alter them, and then put them back into my body. Hey, that's me. That's nobody else. I can't pass that on to my offspring.
Gotcha.
Wow.
Fascinating tech, though, right, guys? This is
it's wild.
the era that we're living in.
Yeah, that's something that's getting a lot of press, is stem cells. And I know stem cells are basically, and please give us more of a detail about it. They're undifferentiated cells. So they're cells that haven't been predetermined as far as their phenotype, right? Like how they're going to be fully expressed, correct?
I gotta say, Will, my opinion of your nerdism is just like off the charts right now. But it's I'm impressed.
Maybe I'm making a fucking false assumption or like talking out my ass here. But what I do know about genetics and stuff like that, it's like, so yeah, these stem cells, like, they're getting a lot of press because of the power that they have on the human body because of that undifferentiation. So can you just tell us a little bit about stem cells? Because I'm hearing more about stem cells therapy, and it's actually a fantastic way to heal tissue and that kind of stuff in the human body, which we haven't been able to do before.
Yeah, so I love it. And I love how you're introducing these terms. You know, again, stem cells, or we call them pluripotent stem cells. That means a cell that can literally become any kind of cell in your body, right?
Yeah.
So when we all start out at that embryo stage, we're all like basically stem cells, right? And then they start to divide, and what we call that big word you just used will differentiate. That means turn into the different cells that become the organs of your body. And everybody, what's encoded in our DNA is called a fate plan. Like for every one of your cells, like what it's going to become. And things like methylation to play a role in that as well. I'm going to get a little nerdy on you, but methylation is a way that biology uses to control gene expression, the timing of gene expression. So for example, if I'm a cardiac myocyte, I might need to express more muscle type genes to make the muscle, that's the heart, than like, cartilage or something, right? That's a joint, So as your cells differentiate based on their function in your body to create your organs and create the organism, that's where all this is like a beautiful symphony that we don't really understand. Now, you mentioned stem cells. In our bone marrow, we got tons of stem cells. They often call them CD34 positive stem cells. They're stem cells, right? That can become all the blood cells in your body. So you think about red blood cells and white blood cells all had the same common progenitor. So you got all these different kinds of white blood cells. You got B cells, T cells, macrophages, eosinophils, all of these different things. And then you've got red blood cells, platelets, all of these things. They all come from progenitor cell, right? And that the ability that we have now scientifically to manipulate those cells to say, hey, you have a bone marrow cancer. So now we're going to engineer your bone marrow cells not to be that cancer. These are different kinds of things that we could do. In the case of the sickle cell gene edit I mentioned, they took stem cells out of the individual, programmed them actually to make like fetal hemoglobin. It's another kind of hemoglobin, right? And then they made enough fetal hemoglobin in order to overcome the sickle cell phenotype. Okay. The genetic mutation. So they edited the stem cells and put them back into the individual, and those became their new red blood cells.
Wow.
See? So the ability to manipulate stem cells more precisely is going to allow us to really cure some diseases, particularly genetic disorders that are caused by one or maybe in sometimes more genes in the future.
Wow. Fascinating.
At the beginning, you talked about the how long it used to take to map the genome. 10 decades, a decade, right? Now you can do it in your clinic for $1,000 in 24 hours or so. What does that mean to, out of the three of us, to this knuckle dragger here? What does that mean? And then what do I, like, if I were to come into your clinic and get that done, what do I do with that?
Well, that's a great question. And I'll say it depends on what your DNA. It's like what the bones say. Like, when you have like the fortune teller, what does your DNA say, right? And there are things that you might want to know about. Like, do I have a predisposition to have a mutation in my P53 gene?
Okay,
if I do, then I'm kind of stuck, right? This is not good. So I might make some different life decisions, right? Because I'm gonna be predisposed to cancer, so I might really try to get the most out of life right now.
Interesting.
Or in my case, I don't have a lot of interesting mutations. Just baseline, I can share with you my own, but I do have one mutation in one of my liver enzymes that if it would cause me to hyper fast process an antidepressant. So if I had to take an antidepressant, they'd have to give me a higher dose because my body just chops it up really fast and I'll pee it out. Right.
Wow.
So because of my liver enzyme, the genotype of one of my liver enzymes. Okay. So this is things I'm helpful to know in case I ever did have to go on an antidepressant. I could go into that conversation with my doctor and be like, look, I'm not going to respond to the standard dose. I already know this. So my dose needs to be this.
How interesting.
So, and this is an emerging area of medicine called pharmacogenomics that knowing those kinds of things will help optimize, your treatment. And I think I'm looking forward to genomics further making its way into clinical practice so that we can improve treatment outcomes that way by getting a lot more precise.
Unbelievable. And I bet you there are other people that have that same mutation and are taking antidepressants and it's not affecting them at all. And they're like, well, what's happening? Wow.
Yeah,
That's all I can say as well.
That's one example. And again, another extreme example. I'll use a celebrity example, Angelina Jolie. Right?
Okay.
She took a test, and her mom, I think, passed of breast cancer. She took a genetic test, and so she carried a BRCA mutation, and that's a breast cancer causing gene, right? And so she opted to have an early mastectomy, right?
Wow.
And that probably
Proactive.
saved her life, right? And so
Wow.
when you think about that kind of this, now that was more of an extreme situation.
Yeah.
There's a very strong linkage of having that mutation and going on to develop breast cancer. Genetics isn't like absolute, though. I mean, I want everybody to understand that. It's just because you kind of have that predisposition, it's not always
guaranteed.
absolute, but in some cases, it's really strong. Like the BRCA1 breast cancer linkage is very, very strong. So if you have one of these BRCA1 variants, you might want to do something about that early. And she chose to, have the mastectomy.
So if we're going somewhere, if we're looking to have that done, what kind of clinic are we going to? A genomic clinic? And how many are there like in the country of those?
Well, no, I mean, you can get it done by you just got to pay for it, right? So you can go and get whole genome sequencing done. There are a number of different vendors. I'm not going to single any out.
Yeah.
But you had your other types of things like Ancestry, and you've heard of 23andMe. They're not doing whole genome sequencing though. They're like sequencing like small bits of your genome, maybe like 10-15%. The rest is not being sequenced in that method. It's a different technology that they use called microarray technology. But the whole genome sequencing, and they call it 30x whole genome. That's like the standard sort of clinical range, can be a little expensive just because it costs a bit more to do the lab part of it, So you'll take the DNA normally from a saliva sample from the cheek cells of somebody. You isolate the DNA out. You have to like treat it a bit and then run it through a whole method that's very specialized. And there are labs that will do that. But generally, I think because it's still a little expensive, most people haven't like gone out and done it. And my recommendation would be like, if you did do it, have at the ready or have contacted a genetic counselor to be able to start to discuss your results. And that's a position in the medical field that we don't have enough of in the country.
Wow. I've never heard of that.
So genetic counselor. So their whole role is to help patients and individuals interpret their genetic test results. And, I hang out with a lot of these folks. I've trained some in my previous time as a professor. And the idea is that you have this intermediary between your doctor and you to help understand that, because the average primary care physician is not a genetic counselor. They don't know like that particular space that well. And so they need some help. And so this is like kind of a specialist. Genetic counseling as a field of specialists that will help you interpret that genetic data and help you understand what you should do with it.
So if somebody's listening and so what are they going to Google in order to get a genetic test and to find a genetic counselor? Like, what do they need to do in order to get, pinpoint, how to activate these services in order to pursue greater health by understanding their DNA, their biology on the deepest level?
I think you can Google, clinical grade whole genome sequencing, right?
Okay.
And something like that. And but like I said, I wouldn't advise doing that unless you had either some sort of family history of something.
Okay.
If you're just curious, you can do it. I mean, it's up to everybody, but generally, your doctor will order it if you had a family history of something. They'll order either a specific type of test, specific genotyping test, or an actual whole genome. And so I think that that's generally a medical decision you make in consultation with your provider. But for me, I've had my genome sequenced 4 times, and I've done it twice myself. Just because you're not really supposed to do that, but I did it just out of curiosity.
I would totally.
Just because I have whole saliva present.
Yeah.
And like I said, for me, it was interesting if the situation arose, I was on that antidepressant. But what I actually found was that genetically, I'm kind of like inert or whatever. Like I'm just normal, I guess. Not normal, but I don't have a lot of stuff to be worried about right now.
Yeah.
But that's not to say, like I said, genetics is a baseline. That's not to say that if I made some different choices in my lifestyle, or, was stressed and kept up, bad living, that I wouldn't damage my DNA and then I would have a problem. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that, as a baseline, I'm a firm believer everybody should get their baseline genetics done. So we know what we're dealing with. And then, have at the ready access to genetic counselors. And now they have telegenetic counseling services where you can zoom in and talk to people, blah, blah, blah. I'll make a plug for a program that's actually free. I don't know that they're doing whole genome sequencing, but they're doing definitely a lot of genetic testing. It's the NIH All of Us program. Okay. And I'm actually through the nonprofit work I do. You mentioned Faith-Based Genetic Research Institute. Mm-hmm. That's a nonprofit I work with to get information out there, generally through communities of faith, churches, and other things about what is genetics and why should you care about it, right? And one of the projects we have going on with the NIH All of Us is just letting people know about it. This is actually taxpayer funded. So they're going to collect 1 million citizens' DNA and sequence it and de-identify it. That means take all the specific information that would identify you out of it. But if you had like a disease predisposition or were experiencing disease, they'd have that information. And that's going to help scientists understand what genes are responsible for what diseases. Because that's the data that we really don't have as much. Yeah. We have it for some things. Like I gave you that breast cancer BRCA1 thing, but there's like countless other conditions that we don't fully understand genetically. And that's why we need to do research on like millions of people to get at that information.
Wow. The future is really bright. I want to talk about one more thing on the genetic realm, and then I want to go into kind of what you're doing, Polaris, and how it's tied to mental health. But another thing that I really keep hearing more about, and something I studied, when I did, my biology degree years ago, is the telomeres and telomerase. Like, and what I understand about the telomere is the end of the DNA sequence, and actually, as we age over time, like they shorten, and that's really kind of the aging process. And now there's more information out there that we can actually introduce or influence or elevate our telomerase levels in our body, which is the enzyme that helps to, I believe, shorter or interrupt that process so aging is slower. Tell me if I'm on the right track here.
I think it's the inverse. I was under the impression that telomerase is actually the thing that kind of helps chop things up, right?
Oh, okay. Got it. Right.
DNA, right? Which gets shorter as you age. So you kind of want to inhibit that process. Okay. So if you have some things that can inhibit telomerase, that would be awesome. And that's one thing. Again, these are one of the great whys. I have all these great whys that, when I die and go meet my creator, I'm going to ask him, like, why did our DNA shorten? Why did you make that happen? Like, why is that kind of what happens? Why do we acquire more methylation over time? And why does our DNA shorten? It's just like kind of how the battery starts to wind down, right? When you think of it like that. So yeah, and we don't all do that at the same rate either. So,
and I imagine lifestyle choices, like whether you're going to be a smoker or whether you're going to work out, or be an alcohol consumer versus eating healthy foods would make an impact on the amount of telomerase in your body, which is causing you to age more.
Exactly. So think about, so if we want to think about telomeres, like think of your body as like a house, right? And telomerase is kind of like a termite. Right?
Okay, got it. Beautiful. Thank you. All
right. How do you prevent the termites? So you put some things, you live a healthier lifestyle, you try to make your temple stronger, right?
Yeah, right.
You strengthen the wood, you do things to treat it. That's what living a healthy lifestyle, mindfulness, and reducing your stress will do. The termite's still going to try to eat, and it might even eat you, right? But you can slow down the process so it doesn't implode your house.
Love it.
I love that. So you talked about Moore's Law earlier, with the old, hey, every, 6 weeks, 6 months, the power of computing is doubling. And I know it's now probably way faster than that. And a lot of what you mentioned, the reason we are where we are is because of technological advances. How do you think AI is going to help this area of science, or is it? I'm sure it is.
It's going to impact it in a major positive way, because I'll tell you, we use AI a lot in our work at Polaris, and we need to. What we're doing with Polaris is really cutting edge, and I'm very excited about it. I used to work at Department of Veterans Affairs, and I ran the research program for aging and neurodegenerative rehabilitation research for the VA for about 9 years. And I remember when I was at the VA, I met several veterans that had struggled with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, like, why don't we have anything better for this thing? Like, you think about PTSD that affects millions of people, particularly a lot of service members who put their life on the line and then have maybe returned from the battlefield, but then have this invisible wound, post-traumatic stress disorder that's real, that was causing many a veteran to take their own life, to commit suicide. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that inspired me with my co-founders with Polaris, Charles Catlin and Dr. Anna Clario, who are both veterans, was what can we do about it? Can we just start to address the problem? Well, one of the major problems is, how do we even determine what PTSD is? Do you guys know how we do that right now?
Yeah, you ask questions.
If you had cancer, would you want somebody to give you a survey to say, do you have cancer or not?
Yeah.
No.
I think it's, how are you sleeping? Do you have any suicidal thoughts? Are you hypervigilant? Those questions. Yeah.
Think about how much of a blunt instrument that is and how imprecise that can be, how subjective that is.
Yeah.
No wonder so many folks. So part of our mandate as a company, what we're really trying to do is use the latest in genetic science to actually build these molecular genetic profiles for what does PTSD look like?
Wow.
What does depression look like? What does anxiety look like? So part of the platform that we built that I call the Adapt platform, I spent my last 6 years working on with the company, is to start to try to answer that question. Now, we still got a lot of research to do.
Sure.
But we've got some early encouraging results in some smaller patient cohort studies. And now we're doing a larger cohort study, 1,000 patient clinical trial. And now I'll put a shout out to everyone out there. Please, go on our website, sign up for our clinical trial, because we need both healthy individuals and PTSD affected individuals for our clinical study. And that will help us develop eventually the kind of product that can be used by the clinicians to better understand who has PTSD, maybe in the future, even how severe their PTSD is. And then we're hoping in the future, they track their response to treatment. These are all the things we want to do. But it starts with understanding what is that genetic profile, or as our chief medical officer calls it, fingerprint. What's the genetic fingerprint that identifies PTSD? And that's the kind of research that we've been trying to push forward.
Wow.
But it's hard. I mean, no one's done it. And so you're kind of that early canary in the coal mine. Nobody believes you can do it, blah, blah, blah. And it's one of those where, as a company, it's been difficult because investors don't always see that. They're going to be like, well, can you really do it? And we don't think you can do it. But, no one thought you could do, Facebook before they did it, right? So you kind of like give yourself a chance to try to push the innovation. And it's really been a great experience for me, and one of the great privileges of my life to work on this problem, because it affects so many millions of people, and we haven't had any new things come out in the last 50 years, really.
Right.
Wow. Well, no wonder why you're so excited about all this technology, because instead of us, taking a guess, you have PTSD because you clicked 6 boxes of the 10 questions that we have. And we're really be able to dive in there and actually, with things like CRISPR and other technologies that I'm sure aren't even discovered yet, and I'm sure are going to be discovered because of AI, is just going to help us to cut through years and years and years of guesses and studies and stuff like that, to really get to more conclusive technology that can really help us drive new results in order to, affect the health of people's lives. So what in your guesstimation, how long is it until like this technology really becomes more mainstream for people? And it's actually also, I know, like, if I want to go to my fucking regular, a primary care physician, they're not going to give me any of these tests. They're going to still, take my heartbeat, check my lungs, and see if my fucking knee flexes. You know what I mean? Like on that little hammer thing. I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's like, these genetic tests should be the baseline that we should be pursuing and looking at through the medical community, so we can actually make, instead of guesstimations, we can really make, hardcore decisions as far as like, hey, you have this genetic disposition. and you should actually pursue this lifestyle or get on this kind of medicine if we need to. So like from that, yeah. So what is it like in like, is it 5 years, 10 years from now that this is going to become more a part of our world?
Probably like 5, 10, maybe even 20 years. Because when you think about it, I mean, let's just go back. We only sequenced the human genome about 25 years ago, which was a huge accomplishment for humanity. Name me another species on the planet that sequenced this genome.
Right. Okay.
Just us, right? So just keep it in perspective, right?
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
We put a man on the moon and we sequenced the human genome. So big up to us. We are amazing as a species.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, true.
So it's going to take us a little longer to change our practices, and that's really what you're talking about. I'm a part of you're preaching to the choir. I believe everyone should be doing precision medicine and become more literate around genetics and precision medicine. Again, I'm passionate about this, giving people the language. Like we've been throwing around some big words today and defining them, epigenetics, and to really kind of understand that. The truth of it is, too, there's a lot of research left to be done. So I'm hopeful that our country and others will continue to fund research in this area because it's really hard to determine causality. That means like you have this mutation, so you're going to get this disease. Right. A lot of times it's murkier than that. And so we need to, you mentioned how AI is really the only way we can do this. Think about it. We have 22,000 genes that we can measure right now. So if I want to look at the levels of all 22,000 genes, my human brain can't.
Yeah, no way.
I could do it. Take me like a year, right? I mean, and I'm a highly trained person, but it would still take me like a year to even look at one person versus an AI that could look at millions of people, all 22,000, and really do it fast at scale. So quantum computing, AI, all of these things are going to transform our field. And like I said, we use that in our everyday process because our data scientists have built some really great platforms where I designed a test. I was the chief science officer, so I had to do a lot of work here on this part. This was kind of my contribution. Designed a test that looks at 1,003 genes, right? That are mostly related to neurological health and things like signaling, like how serotonin receptor signals. That's one of the things when you take an antidepressant, they often react on the serotonin receptor, things like that, different molecules, also inflammation, because again, I know how important inflammation is. So our platform measures inflammation, and it also relates to some other molecules that are related to brain injury, like TBI. And the reason I did that is because I knew in the military, TBI and PTSD are comorbid 70% of the time.
Right.
So I was trying to make a tool that not only we could use, but other research communities, pharma, whoever could use to help decipher what all this stuff looks like, right? So even with that, we have a heavy reliance on AI. Once I generate that sequence data from the individual and hundreds, maybe thousands of individuals, now AI can go through and comb the pattern of those 1,000 genes in each individual and start to zero in on which one associates with disease. And that's what we've done with our first PTSD product that we're clinically validating right now. And so it's still going to take several years for us to do thousands of patient studies that the FDA requires for us to be able to release a test to the market. But we're committed to doing that. And I'm hoping that we can get more investor money and not run out of money before we can finish that part. Right. So that's kind of like where we are. But it's been a very exciting journey, a great effort. And like I said, our whole team has been impacted by this, either having been veterans or served veterans, and have really seen that we really need some new tools like this. So we're passionate and committed to try to bring something to the market.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. And as a veteran myself, as a veteran with both post-traumatic stress and TBIs, I am very thankful for what it is you're doing. And I know many of our listeners are going to be thankful too. If they wanted to contribute to this study, you said, hey, we're looking for healthy people to contribute to the study. We're looking for people with post-traumatic stress to contribute to the study. Or where are they going? Are they going to Polaris.com?
Go to our website, www.polarisgenomics.com. You'll have some information about our company, about how to sign up for the study. We're setting up some new sites as well. We set up one site here in DC. There's one in Chicago, and we're going to be setting up one in San Diego very soon too. We just started the study like in August. We got some funding to help us support the study, and so that's what we've been doing. And so we've got about 2 years to complete this 1,000-patient study to validate our models and show their clinical utility and develop it into a test that could go through FDA approval. That's our mission. So, if anybody can help us with that, that would be great.
And we'll spread the word.
Yes,
well, you know,
we're
going to add this. Like, I really want to help spread the word, so we're going to actually add this to our website
for sure.
So we'll be in touch with a way to kind of, integrate this into your website so we can get people directly to you. And we mostly have men too as our population. So, and men probably might be less likely to do this kind of thing. So hopefully if they're listening to this and any men out there that really want to contribute to the science and really the next generation of medicine, that is going to take away a lot of the guesswork, then we really suggest plugging into what Tshaka is doing and Polaris Genomics. But thank you, Tshaka. This has been just such an enlightening episode and really inspiring to see, what like the future of medicine, the future of health. I learned a lot also. And we continually have experts on that come on the show to talk about what healthy lifestyle is, and this is, we can hear from you the impact of a healthier lifestyle, like eating well, like physically, like exercising, like adopting more of like meditation practice and more mindfulness practices. It could really make a big difference on our overall health and therefore the health of our community. And one thing that's really important, we didn't talk, like we mentioned in Blue Zone, is connecting into community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're doing our social fitness club. So head to our website for that. You quick, shameless plug on that.
You'll live longer. If you join us, you're going to live longer.
If you join our social fitness club, and maybe Tshaka can drop in, if you want one of these days. We'd love to have maybe a guest and you can talk to us a little bit, take us a little deeper, would be amazing. Thank you, Tshaka. I think we got all the information. Anything on social that we can kind of hit you up, or just your website's the best way to find you?
Best is our Polaris Genomics. We got social media people. I'm not big on social media, man, because they just stick me in the lab and I'm doing my thing. But but I know the importance of it. So we get it out on our channels there through Polaris. But yeah, this was a blast, guys. I'm happy to chat with you guys anytime. You can tell how much I love this stuff. I've been doing it for a while. And, my goal is to make sure that I share the knowledge that I have so everybody else can live a healthier life.
There you go.
Because it's short. It's
it is. It goes so fast.
So you really want to get the most you can out of it and really, give back to the community that you're in, because that's going to improve your life. And so I love that concept of community and our, giving ourselves comfort. In trying times, I think even as politically divided as everybody feels at this moment, we are all part of, the same family, human family. And if we put our arms around each other and really, be able to create those caring environments, that's going to lower everybody's stress.
That's
and
right.
Lower stress is going to lead to a happier life.
Amen to that. And apparently a longer life.
Longer life is going to preserve your DNA.
There you go. There you go. Man, what better way to end the conversation than that? Tshaka, been phenomenal having you on here. And let's jump into our closing practice to help us all, the three of us here and our audience, do one more closing grounding practice to help us all lower our stress levels and live longer. So we're just going to do just like Will did at the very beginning, just one breath grounding practice. I know everybody listening to Tshaka got very excited about everything that we're talking about, and listening to Will and you guys, the two of you guys, wow. And I'm on a different level. You guys are on a different level. So anyhow, let's just bring ourselves into this time, this space, by bringing our attention to our breath. And we'll begin by emptying our lungs with that exhale. Nice, long, slow exhale. And now the reverse, a nice, long, slow, deep, innocent breath in, hold, and release. And as you release that, just feel the stress releasing, imagine it releasing, visualize it releasing, and go ahead and start to bring some movement back into your bodies. And if your eyes were closed, go ahead and open them back up. And Dr. Cunningham, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to come back and watch this several times over, and we're excited to share this with our community. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. It was a total pleasure. Treat for me. And anytime, guys. Keep doing the great work you're doing with your podcast. And
thank you so much.
Thanks again.
All right. And for our listeners, thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, peace. Take care.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.